What would you do if you said your body belongs to the gods, while knowing, deep down, it belongs to every man? In ancient Babylon, being a sacred prostitute seemed like an honor. They said the chosen of Ishtar, goddess of love and war, were touched by the divine. Streets bowed to the bright veils they wore, and priests called them holy women. But behind the offerings, the perfumes, and the temple lights, there hid a quiet tragedy. Worshipped by all, free for no one. From a very young age, they were given to the temple as living offerings. Parents believed they were securing the god's blessing, when in truth, they were sending their daughters into a life with no way back. Older priestesses bathed them in oils and taught them to smile, even as the soul cracked. Every touch would be a prayer, they said. Every kiss, an act of faith. But there, faith and servitude were the same thing. The temple looked like paradise, but it was a prison draped in silk and incense. Golden walls smothered the sound of hymns, of weeping, of broken promises. Outside, the priest preached that these women brought fertility to the city, that they were the bridge between mortals and gods. Inside, each offering became a ritual, and each ritual cost another piece of a silent soul. It was there, between gold and darkness, that the true misery of Ishtar's chosen began. Before we go on, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Each episode is a journey into the darkest, most forgotten corners of history, and your support keeps that journey alive. Tell me in the comments what shocked you most about these ancient professions the past tried to hide. That's how I know you're one of those who won't settle for the pretty version of history. You want to see what really happened behind the walls of temples and thrones? Within the walls of Ishtar's temple, a sacred prostitute learned that her body wasn't hers. It was an instrument of the gods, a bridge between heaven and earth, a channel where desire turned into devotion. But behind the music, the perfumes, and the colored veils lay the weight of a life that would never be her own. The elders taught the young that pleasure was sacred, but love was forbidden. No attachments, no choices. Every touch, a ritual. Every gaze, an offering. The temple set the rules, the gods demanded obedience, and the city expected them to keep the balance between the divine and the human, even if the price was their very soul. Nights opened with songs and incense burning in bronze bowls. The air was heavy, the floor strewn with petals, and the flutes wove through the women's voices singing to fertility. Men came seeking blessings, claiming they touched the goddess's body, but in truth, they touched the body of a tired woman, trained to smile even while her heart bled. Each man left coins, promises, or offerings and walked away convinced he was purified. She stayed, cleaning the altar, washing her body, erasing her humanity in the name of the sacred. The temple was the heart of Babylonian life, and inside it everything revolved around the illusion of divine purity. The sacred prostitutes were called the chosen, but they knew they were chosen by necessity, not by faith. Many were given as children, sold by poor families who believed they were granting a noble fate. They grew up between hymns and judging eyes. Men revered them, women despised them. And so, between gold and shame, they served a divinity that never answered. In the silence before dawn, when the temple emptied and the singing stopped, they stared at a ceiling painted with stars and wondered if Ishtar truly saw them. Perhaps not. Perhaps the gods were as distant as the men who paid to touch them. Even so, at the first drumbeat of morning, they returned to the altar, because in Babylon's temple, even suffering was part of the ritual, and running meant defying fate itself. By day, the temple was a spectacle of faith and power. Stone columns glittered in the sun, and priests moved slowly past, covered in gold and perfume. The sacred prostitutes walked among them in silence, fine veils and painted eyes like living statues. Everyone looked with reverence, but also with desire, the kind of reverence soaked in guilt. The city believed that touching them brought fertility, prosperity, and pardon. So men lined the temple stairs with wheat, wine, and coin, waiting for their moment to commune with the goddess. What no one saw was the other side of that ritual. When the last visitor left, the sacred turned to silence, and the silence turned to emptiness. They were called the goddess's brides, yet they lived trapped in a cycle of purity and sin. They couldn't love, couldn't become pregnant, couldn't grow old. The temple decided when to eat, when to sleep, when to smile. Their bodies shone with jewels, but carried marks gold couldn't hide, tired eyes, and the weight of duty. To foreign visitors, the ritual looked divine. To those inside, it was another kind of prison. At night, the scent of flowers mingled with incense and sweat. The youngest priestesses were chosen to receive travelers and soldiers, each encounter wrapped in prayers promising blessings in exchange for pleasure. They said the touch purified, that desire pleased the gods. But in truth, the women of the temple carried the burden of an empire. They gave their bodies in the name of faith and received only the God's silence and the world's contempt. Still they went on. In Babylon, defying the sacred was the gravest disgrace, and fleeing the temple was a death sentence. In time, the temple's shine lost its charm. Golden walls no longer seemed holy, only cold. What used to be called devotion revealed itself as servitude. Babylon's sacred prostitutes were seen as mediators between gods and men, but in truth, they were prisoners of a system that turned the body into an offering. Every gesture was ritual, every word a rehearsed prayer, and behind painted eyes and golden collars, there was fear of aging, fear of illness, fear of being forgotten. In the temple, a woman's worth lasted only as long as her beauty survived the years and the men who came in the name of faith. The priests controlled everything. They decided who would be chosen, who would rest, who would be replaced. They claimed divine orders, but the gods never replied, and the women, obedient, bowed. Some cried in silence during the rites. Others learned to smile as part of the performance. The temple was a prison disguised as a sanctuary. Inside, there was no childhood, no future, only days repeating like an endless service. Each new visitor was met with the same calm, empty gaze, the same ritual touch, the same promise of redemption. Foreigners, fascinated, called it the sacred marriage. For the women of the temple, it was just another nameless night, another body to please gods who never came down from the sky. When the last flame died, what remained was silence, the kind that weighs more than sin. There, between veils and shadows, Babylon's sacred prostitutes learned a truth no one dared to say. There was no divinity in the giving, only obedience. In the end, the body was the altar where everyone knelt except the gods. As the years passed, the temple stopped being a symbol of faith and became a gilded prison. New girls arrived, bright-eyed and hopeful, only to learn what the elders already knew. Here, the body was an offering and a sentence. The smell of incense and perfumed oil hid. The weight of long nights and unanswered prayers. Training taught them how to move before the faithful, how to speak sweetly, how to turn each gesture into devotion. Nothing taught them how to endure the emptiness that followed. They no longer belonged to themselves. They belonged to the goddess, the temple, and to men seeking comfort dressed as faith. The priestesses, stern and imposing, watched every detail. They corrected a glance, adjusted a posture, reminding them the body must look divine, even when the soul was exhausted. Offerings poured in, gold, wine, fine cloth, but none of it was theirs. Luxury was just part of the rite, a way to hide how cruel the sacred could be. Sometimes before dawn, a few tried to wash their faces in cold basin water, as if they could erase the touch, the words, the weight of the rites. Others simply stared toward the horizon, waiting for sunrise, not for faith, but for relief. Babylon's temple was grand, pillars and chants, but behind devotion stood a marketplace dressed as worship. Ishtar was praised as the symbol of love and fertility, yet those who served in her name knew the truth. Love there was duty, and fertility a burden. Between perfumes, promises, and offerings, faith blurred into exploitation, and each woman learned that a body can be called sacred and still be treated as property. In time, the sacred prostitutes learned to read the faces of the men climbing the temple stairs. Some came drunk on wine, others on despair. Some believed they were cleansing the soul. Others only needed a body to ease their guilt. Every touch, every look was part of a ritual mixing faith and pleasure, power and submission. The temple claimed the female body was a bridge between men and gods. In practice, it was their bodies holding up the empire of faith, while the weight of devotion fell only on their backs. The elders taught the young to master their emotion. Never cry during the rite, they said. The gods don't like tears. They learned to smile when the heart sank, to sing when the body hurt, to feign grace when the soul begged to run. Heavy perfume hid the smell of fear. Gold bracelets masked the marks left by hands that confused divinity with dominion. And when one of them fell ill, she was simply replaced. The temple never stopped. Faith had to continue, even at the cost of lives. The priestesses said every act was an offering to Ishtar, but no one spoke of what happened when the lamps went out. These women didn't pray for salvation. They prayed for strength, to endure one more day, to carry a faith that didn't free, only consumed. Sometimes, watching the sun rise over Babylon's towers, they wondered if the goddess truly saw them, or if, like the men who sought them, she only used them to keep the illusion of the sacred alive. In time, the temple became less a word for faith and more a word for exhaustion. The sacred prostitutes aged quickly, not from years, but from rites that never ended. New girls arrived with the same sparkle the elders once had, believing the promises of glory and blessing. In a few months, they learned the temple did not shelter. It consumed. Each rehearsed gesture, each repeated chant was just another cog in a cult that served the gods. And the men? The priests watched everything with the calm of those who wear power and mystery as a shield. They spoke of purity, yet bargained women's bodies like offerings for sale. Gold, wine, and incense piled high on the altars, while those who upheld the worship were left with nothing. The city revered the goddess and ignored the women who bore her name, and so faith turned into spectacle and the sacred into merchandise. Some tried to resist. They hid small keepsakes in their robes, a river stone, a dried flower, a scrap of plain cloth, anything to remember life before the temple. Others, out of strength, stared past the walls, dreaming of a freedom they would never know. The temple was vast, but their world fit into a few steps of cold floor. And when the prayers ended and the incense burned to ash, what remained was the sound of a heart trying to remember what it meant to be human. Because in Babylon, to be a sacred prostitute was not to be chosen by the gods, it was to be forgotten by them. If you made it this far, you're brave enough to face the hidden side of history, the side almost no one tells. So go ahead and subscribe to Cursed Professions. Every week, we unearth another dark chapter time tried to bury. Drop a like to power the channel and show you're one of those who won't settle for the pretty version. And comment Ishtar below so I know you stayed to the end and see beyond the veil of temples and the appearance of the sacred. Don't go anywhere. The next video on your screen dives even deeper into the past to uncover another cursed profession where power, faith, and sacrifice walked side by side.